about second breakfast.
Time for second breakfast.
What's up, everybody? Monster from Breakdowns for Breakfast here with another second breakfast. So, if you listened to our episode this week, we discussed a female-fronted band called The Pretty Wild. And Danger and I were both pretty into that album, pretty into that band. And I can't remember who exactly, because, you know, as soon as the words come out of our mouth and we print it and we roll on, I forget everything I said. But I know we talked about some other female-fronted bands during that episode. I know we brought up Spirit Box. I know we brought up Poppy. But I'm sure we brought up a few others. Women in rock and metal is nothing new. But it's still a bit of an anomaly, and it's always cool to see female-fronted rock and metal acts. And one of the first pioneers of women in rock music was a woman by the name of Big Mama Thornton. She has a very interesting story, and I'm not going to go into the entire life and times of Big Mama Thornton, but she is very, very important to rock and roll. And I don't know that a lot of people know who she is. In fact, I didn't know who she was until very recently when I watched the movie Sinners for the first time, the Michael B. Jordan vampire film. And it centers around blues music. And listening to some podcasts and watching some YouTube videos about the film Sinners, Big Mama Thornton came up. And I looked into her story and kind of why she's important. And I thought, you know what? We just got done doing a female-fronted rock band. Now seems like a really appropriate time to talk about Big Mama Thornton and why she's so important to rock and roll music. And if you've heard this story before, I'm probably going to leave some stuff out. Like I said, there's tons of stuff about her online that you can find. Most of this I got off of Wikipedia. But I got a few quotes here about her, and I'm going to kind of get into sort of her early life. And if you don't know where this story is going as far as why she's influential, strap in, because I think it's pretty interesting. But unfortunately, it does have a little bit of a sad ending, but we'll get there. So Willie Mae Thornton, also known as Big Mama Thornton, was born December 11th, 1926. She was a singer and songwriter, specifically in blues and R&B. Now, if you remember, I did an episode on cursed songs. I brought up Robert Johnson. I don't know how much I spoke about this there. I've mentioned this a few times on the regular show. I'm not a big blues guy. It's just not really my thing. I can respect it. I think there's a lot of talent, especially like lyrically and vocally. They tell these great stories. It's just not my favorite style of music. But I digress. So I'm not going to tell you exactly why she's important quite yet. I'm going to give you a little bit of her backstory. But she was one of seven children. Her birth certificate claims she was born in Ayrton, Alabama, but she said in an interview that she claims Montgomery, Alabama as her real birthplace. Now I'll get into some quotes. She's a very colorful lady as far as like the way she talks and presents herself. So that might have just been her way of saying, you know, in my heart, I'm from Montgomery, Alabama. But it's also well known that back in those days, especially for black people, a lot of times records weren't kept as well. So who knows 100% sure. She grew up in a church, and that's where she was introduced to gospel music. And she didn't take the singing like right away, but that's where she first started to kind of develop a taste for music. Her mother died of tuberculosis in 1939, and Thornton was only about 13 years old, and she actually pretty much took care of her mother up until the time of her death. And when she did die, she had kind of gotten into this position where she actually had to quit school and get a job. And she got a job washing and cleaning spittoons at a local tavern. So that's not great, but anybody that's had a bad job knows sometimes you got to do what you got to do. So around this, actually a little bit earlier than this, I think it was when she was around 8 is when she first learned how to play harmonica. But it was after her mother died that I think she sort of really started to take music serious. She said, my singing comes from my experience, my own experience. I had never had no one teach me nothing. I never went to school for music for nothing. I taught myself to sing and to blow harmonica and even to play drums by watching other people. I can't read music, but I know what I'm singing. I don't sing like nobody but myself. I love that sentence, by the way. I can't read music, but I know what I'm singing. I don't sing like nobody but myself. That is a profound statement from a musician. I too sing like nobody else, but nobody wants to hear me sing. Big Mama Thornton, on the other hand, she can sing all she wants. She goes on to say in another interview, she says, my father was a minister. He's a Baptist preacher, and my mother, she was very religious. And me, I don't know what I am. Was just born with the blues. I really got the blues, you know, in 39 when I lost my mother. And then I said, well, I don't know what to do. I said, well, I think I want to sing the blues. So I said, well, at that time I was listening to Big Maceo, another blues singer, his Worried Life Blues. And I said, I think I want to sing that. And I did. That was a beautiful number. So she's doing all this at kind of a young age. And then in 1940, she was discovered by another blues artist around this area named Diamond Teeth Mary. Man, they always had cool names, didn't they? So when Diamond Teeth Mary discovered her, she joined this traveling variety show called Sammy Green's Hot Harlem Review. There she was kind of hired on to do like dancing and sort of like comedic kind of stuff, but eventually, and some backup singing, but eventually people realized how good of a singer she was, and so they kind of put her up to the front. And she did that for a while. It says she quit in 1948 due to money disputes. Apparently they owed her a lot of money that they didn't give her. And unfortunately, that would be something that would continue for the rest of her life. So after this time, Thornton moved to Houston. She started singing at this ballroom. She got her first record deal in 1950, and she started recording some of her own songs. None of these songs were like huge hits. All Right Baby, Bad Luck Got My Man, and they were sort of like local hits. But as time went on, she went to play at a bigger ballroom, and she met other record labels and got other deals. And she eventually met this guy named Johnny Otis. So basically, Johnny Otis was working with Peacock Records, and they were working with Otis California Rhythm and Blues Caravan, where they would like pick up artists to kind of take them on the road, give them exposure, get them some experience. And it would include being able to get artists a spot to record at a recording studio in Los Angeles. And so and then also get some national distribution. So while working with Otis, Thornton recorded a song. This song was written by Jerry Lieber and Mike Stoller. That song was called Hound Dog. She recorded this song in 1952. Now, if that name sounds familiar, it's because I know you've heard that song before. You may have never heard Big Mama Thornton sing it, but I know you've heard Elvis Presley sing it. Now, here's where the story gets a little bit interesting. So whenever they gave her this song to record, they basically told her, we want you to sing it in this like really belt it out and growl it out. And she kind of pushed back on it a little bit and was like, I'm going to do it however I want. And they said, no. Do it this way. Trust us. So she did. This song went on to be a hit record. Now remember, this is in 1952, and it sold more than 500,000 copies. It spent 14 weeks in the R&B charts, including 7 weeks at #1. But even though Hound Dog became a big hit, Thornton never received the acknowledgement or monetary compensation she deserved for the record. Reportedly, there was all kinds of, and this is true to today. As a musician, I see this and hear this all the time. There's so many fingers in the pie that eventually the cuts get smaller and smaller. She claimed she only received one $500 royalty check from her original version of the song. She went on to say, "Didn't get no money from them at all. Everybody living in a house but me. I'm just living." Now, 1952, Hound Dog came out. It was pretty successful. It was her biggest hit. It was a #1 hit on the R&B charts. But 3 years later, people would become infamously familiar with Hound Dog when it was recorded by Elvis Presley. Now, here's a little bit of a controversial take. Supposedly, Elvis Presley did know who Big Mama Thornton was. But he, from what I understand, didn't seem to have any real recollection of her version of the song. He had heard a version by a group called Freddie Bell and the Bell Boys while attending one of their shows in Las Vegas. If you listen to Big Mama Thornton's version, the lyrics are about Hound Dog refers to a scoundrel of a man. Whereas when you get to Elvis Presley's version, it's a lot more, I don't want to use the word sanitized, but it's much more safe for square white audiences in the 50s, so to speak. So, because I think there was a little bit of a Elvis Presley stole this song from this woman and never gave her any sort of, I don't think that's really how it went down. It was more like he heard this other version and thought, yeah, I could turn that into something. And he most certainly did. So after that, Thornton did go on to continue to write and record music. And a matter of fact, she had another, she didn't have so much of a hit with this, but she wrote a song called Ball and Chain, which eventually became a fairly famous song by Janis Joplin. Same situation. There was all kinds of stuff about writing credits and song credits and stuff. She never really got paid for any of those things. And then to just sort of add, a little bit of sadness to the end of this story here, what I read was that she died in 1984, July 25th, 1984, of a heart attack and liver disorders. She was pretty much penniless and living in a boarding house in Los Angeles. And unfortunately, I think her legacy has kind of gone mostly unremembered. But you got to think, the blues back in the 40s was really, it was a black style of music. It wasn't really crossing over into white audiences. And then when she wrote that song, Hound Dog, it became what we would call today kind of a crossover hit with a lot of white bands covering it and eventually being covered by Elvis Presley. And, it's sort of been infamously documented that a lot of those artists like Elvis Presley kind of got their sound by taking these, this music made by minorities and whitening it up basically to get mainstream success. So it's a real shame that Big Mama Thornton never got the recognition that she really did deserve. Now, she was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2024 for just how influential she was on rock and roll music. So I do think that she's kind of, and it might have had a lot to do with that film Sinners. Like I said, it does not directly say anything about her, but it just, I think, threw a little bit of a spotlight on blues musicians and blues music back in that time period. And so, good for her. I think she deserves it. Again, this isn't really my style of music. Even the Elvis stuff is not really for me. So, I would have never, came across this story any other way, but I'm glad I did. If you like blues music, if you like, this kind of era of music, 40s and 50s. Did you know this? Is this old news? Like, am I late to the party? That's very well possible. I've been that way before, so it wouldn't shock me. But yeah, this was the story of Big Mama Thornton. I thought it was really cool. Maybe you learned a little bit here. There's so much more to her life. She wrote a lot of other songs. You can go on Spotify and YouTube and find all kinds of performances. She has a great, powerful voice, a lot of fun lyrics. I would recommend checking her out if you like blues, if you like this kind of music. But yeah, thanks for sticking around. I hope you learned a little something, and hope you have a great day.